Welcome to the coolest class you never got to take. Where else do you get to think about how important TV is in your life? How important it is in society? It's right here in your ears. You, me, and in this season, we're joined by some really smart guests. You'll learn an awful lot about how changes to cable TV led to the explosion of programming capacity, and we saw more women, and how original and recycled content filled that time. Please share this episode, recommend us to friends and family, press play for someone who hasn't quite nailed that technology thing. Thanks for listening. Hey you, thanks for tuning into this season of Advanced TV Herstory, the one where we think about, talk about, and revisit television for women, television about women. In the first 3 episodes of this season, we've talked with noted media scholars Drs. Amanda Lotz and Emily Newman about the business side of television. Technological changes that caused a rapid increase of cable channels almost overnight. The capacity for programming exploded. And we also talked about the content and how channels filled their time, at least in the early days. Today, we can look at the cable networks who brand themselves for women or about women. And yes, 10 and 20 years later, it all looks different. Though it all looks different because, again, technology, economics, and society, they're driving progress and innovation and a whole new sense of how we see things that used to be considered womanly. So all that change makes water cooler viewing pretty rare. Yes, listeners, there was a time when TV brought us together, not just for the occasions we share today, like major sporting events, world-rattling news, or the occasional landmark episode of a long-running series. Rather, we mourn that the world is more connected than ever, yet has less in common. And this is partly what's missing. But as Dr. Amanda Lotz explained, changes to cable 30 years ago put the first pinhole in the balloon, that big balloon that had been the broadcast channels. So powerful and so the only balloon in the room. The 3 networks that ensured that Monday morning water cooler fodder was good, was programmed the way that they wanted it to be. And those 3 networks, though, they were largely run by white men. Decisions made at lower levels, like which shows would be piloted or renewed and the prime time slots, even how to assign a consistent time slot, which shows got those. That was all pretty much white men making those decisions all those years. And so every achievement, every milestone of TV herstory is one that we do need to celebrate. And so it was that the broadcast network balloons started losing air that, and I'm sorry because I have to shift the metaphor to pie, because now all of a sudden we go from this finite unit of something like a balloon, which only had the air of 3 networks, and we have to shift to pie because once cable happened, other avenues popped up to serve the appetites of those who hadn't seen themselves on TV. And so you went to something where you could actually get a piece of this total audience viewing. Because it's about that time that VHS and video stores enabled us to control what we watched. And then cable came on. There was more competition than ever for a share of the viewership pie. The corporate response, as Dr. Lotz outlined, was mergers and conglomerations, so that everything was set and it was no longer broadcast versus cable, but rather every big company owned a piece at every level of the game, and in some cases owned other aspects of entertainment as well. So sorry for the mixed metaphors, but sometimes I just have to kind of think visually, and it all usually comes down to pie, right? So listeners, there's a part of all this that seems practically invisible. But today we are finding that ownership model across platforms or networks really does have meaning for the artists and the creatives. In spring 2019, listeners, perhaps you saw big headlines about how Fox Network was getting sued by its own series Bones, which starred Emily Deschanel and actually starred 3 women in strong STEM careers. They were getting sued for $179 million. What? The people of Bones suing Fox? I asked Dr. Lotz to explain, because this is how the modern relationship of production, distribution, and contracts comes to a point that makes it harder for you and me to see our favorite shows, and also harder for those performers, writers, and producers to collect the payday that should accompany their work if their work is available to the entire marketplace.
So when all of these shows we've been talking about, they are made initially for a network, but the production company typically loses money. So in the case of Bones, which was made for Fox, the studio there makes the show, and they make it for Fox, even though Fox isn't paying them enough to cover their costs, because when the show is done airing on Fox, then the studio can sell it again and again in different places around the world, to cable. And that's actually where, when you think of people making money in television, that's where the money is made. It's actually not in the original primetime airing. And so this is a story where this is something everyone in Hollywood kind of assumes is going on. But for the most part, it hasn't been litigated in public. And in the fact that these things have gone to court has made public documents available that typically aren't available, like budgets. And so basically what happened was that the creators and talent on Bones brought suit against the studio for selling the show for less than it was worth, because it was being sold to another Fox property. In this case, most of the coverage that I've seen has been paying attention to the use of Bones on Hulu, and Hulu is jointly owned by Fox, ABC, or Disney, and NBC Universal. And basically the idea that this show, it was making money was leading people were watching it on Hulu, but the talent that actually made the show was not getting paid the residual that they were due for that availability. And so why I think this is a big story is that the bated breath, I'd say, of 2019 is certainly watching the launch of the Disney Plus service and whatever's coming from Warner Media as these services that may or may not rival Netflix. I think there's actually a lot of room in the marketplace for several services. But the reason why Disney and Warner are launching is because they want to own the whole chain from making the content to actually reaching the consumer, instead of having a middleman, let's say like Netflix or like a cable service provider, in the way taking any of that money. And what the case really uncovers is the consequences for talent of that kind of situation, and the way in which the kind of talent arrangements that are standard and that have been written didn't properly anticipate an environment where all of this dealing is going on within a single company. To go back to that conversation about conglomeration that we started with. It used to be that the networks weren't allowed to own their own programming, and so you didn't have the same kind of self-dealing. And when you have the self-dealing and you don't have, sort of the networks being transparent or not the networks as much as the studios being publicly accountable, then that's a really big deal. And it enables them to sell their content for less than it's probably worth to help other co-owned brands. So whether it's, a channel that Fox also owns, or in this case, helping its streaming service. So that will be interesting to see how that continues to affect the industry. And I'm sure the guilds will have things to say on those issues.
Somehow, this doesn't surprise me. And you can bet I'm going to track this lawsuit every step of the way. And I'm all the wiser for it, too, because I only recently began watching and finished Fargo, the series, which was an FX series, season 2. Yes, I'm a bit behind. And I had to go to Hulu. It was on Hulu because there will probably never be another way to watch it. And I wonder whether the fantastic talent, the actors, the writers, the directors, who delivered all this entertainment will ever have their work truly rewarded in the marketplace? Or has it just been sent over to the shelf on Hulu And if you want it, you're going to have to subscribe to Hulu. Now, it's true that the glass is usually half empty when we're talking about women and representation and equity across the spectrum, not just of entertainment, but everywhere else. All the other industries that we know that there's still so much work that has to be done. But also, we do have a lot to celebrate, a lot of good that came from cable and premium and subscription streaming over all these 30 years. And that's the fun part of producing a podcast. So it's time to celebrate and recall and recommend great series that are worth at least a few test episodes. It's going to be a long, hot summer. Perhaps it'll merit that long, slow binge that might last a year, but you enjoy it. In her books, Dr. Lotz applied milestone credit to series from throughout the 90s that marked change or progress or innovation. We covered a few in our chat. La Femme Nikita, you highlight as being perhaps the first influential series on cable TV.
And it's been redone more recently. La Femme Nikita was the first, or I would argue, the first successful basic cable series, and it was on USA. It debuted in 1997. And so there definitely were shows before, but this was one that actually gained some traction, and it was it was built around a female character in sort of this dystopian spy world that actually I think it probably still plays well today, to be honest. And so, I think that's just, that's the story of La Femme Nikita. It was notable that it was a what I would call a female-centered drama as well in that moment, and that it was as successful as it was in the late 1990s through the early 2000s.
Mixing it up a little bit, Project Runway, the role of Project Runway, and where did it start and what does it mean?
Oh, I'm not good on the details on reality for the most part. My focus has been scripted. I know that it's jumped channels and I know that it's been popular, but that's about all I've got.
It started at Bravo and ended up at
Lifetime.
At Lifetime.
Yeah.
And was recognized as a hot property for all sorts of reasons. And I think one would say that there are so many industries that owe a certain debt of gratitude to exposure. And when we talk about representation, yes, we can talk about the representation of women or LGBTQ characters or characters of color and people of color, men or women. But we also can talk about representation of careers because there's more of a career than just being a professional hockey player or football player. And so when I think about Project Runway and the various cake shows and the cooking shows and even What Not to Wear, which is next on my list, we get to the creativity behind fashion and the storytelling that goes with all of these real people who were presenting their talents and wares. What did you ever watch What Not to Wear?
Not frequently. I was really glad in the early 2000s when other people started, doing really great work on what we were calling reality television then, because at that time, there was the start of more drama than I could actually watch. So we have to develop our own expertise, and the reality was not mine.
It was, again, somewhat educational, and I just had a conversation with somebody about What Not to Wear and how in reality they could have been longer episodes and there could have been more teaching about body shape and what goes with a certain body shape and why you should be steering more toward colors. And so it was a little bit more of a classic reality show where they were trying very hard to move a storyline along, sometimes at the expense of the person who was being made over. A happy ending at the end, but as the viewer, it probably wasn't as educational an opportunity as you might have hoped because you still didn't quite know how it is that the person transformed. Bravo, A&E, TNT, cable channels that filled their programming slots and launched their brands with shows that appealed to women. None of them focused on women exclusively. None of them set out to be the destination for women viewers. In the late 90s and early 2000s, in the drama category, however, Lifetime, the CW, UPN, the WB, and Fox all programmed with an emphasis on strong women characters. And that's a phrase, strong women characters, that I am now using only when necessary. But it applies right here and now because it describes a show's distinction. These series come up in part because Start TV is now in the cable lineup, targeting women, or at least featuring series with strong women casts, including The Division and Strong Medicine. So did those fall into your areas of study?
Yeah, so those were both Lifetime originals that probably many have forgotten. But as Lifetime was trying to expand its original series offerings, it was their take on these classic American TV genres like the medical show with Strong Medicine and The Division, which was a police show that featured overwhelmingly female casts, and were, in the case of Strong Medicine, not only did you have two female doctors that were the center, but you also they were focused on women's health, and so they were solid shows in terms of that genre and very familiar in that regard. And they lasted several seasons on Lifetime. And although we're sort of at that moment right before sort of shows that have gone on to have lives in streaming. And so they're really hard to find in the world.
So The Division and Strong Medicine are on Start TV and as well as The Closer. So The Closer and Major Crimes were elements of, or they were creations for TNT and had quite a lifespan. I love those shows. Have you studied much or talked much about The Closer and Major Crimes?
Not a ton. They come a bit later, and are very much in that police genre. I mean, I think you could do a nice, you could sort of trace the trajectory of what The Division was doing in the late 1990s in terms of bringing a female eye to the police genre, and that is then somewhat refocused in a slightly different way with The Closer. Almost a decade later. I think that's around 2005.
Yeah, and I did an early podcast episode on The Closer and the fact that they bring Brenda Lee Johnson in at a very high, at a leadership level of the LAPD, whereas the only other prominent woman law enforcement officer at the time was Olivia Benson, who had sort of been a detective and a detective and a detective for so much. She's been on now for 20 years, and yet many of those 20 years, she was just another, detective in the precinct. And so I'm glad that they kind of put Brenda Lee Johnson at a much higher level to make her more powerful and to have her working within a culture that was so male-oriented. I think that it remains a really great show. The other thing I will say, though, about watching these older series, Strong Medicine and The Division, on HD cable channels today is the graininess, the quality of however it was shot and preserved.
Yeah, that's the end of the standard def era, pretty much. A lot of those shows. So they should have been shot on film. So it may just be whatever the cable service is using to broadcast it.
And then there was premium. The cable channels my family never included in our monthly packages. Talk a little bit about Sex and the City, because as I've brought up some examples, we have jumped from Lifetime shows and Bravo and TLC with What Not to Wear. And then you have Sex and the City, which was this big gamble coming out of HBO when HBO decided it was going to create original programming.
Right. So in the book, and We Now Disrupt This Broadcast, I look at Oz as the first big show to come from a premium cable service. In other words, a cable service that is entirely run on subscriber funding, which leads them to create programming with a really different strategy and measurement of success. But I think it often gets lost that Sex and the City did debut before The Sopranos, which I think quickly took a lot of the cultural attention. But yes, Sex and the City in the late 1990s, I think in a tradition of shows such as Designing Women and Golden Girls, offers multiple points of identification. And so one of the things that's really, I think, a burden or was really tough representationally for shows such as Maude or the Mary Tyler Moore Show to a degree was the degree to which you had one woman kind of standing in for all women. And some of these shows with a broader female cast, very deliberately present women who, are friends, they're connected in some way, but they have very different outlooks. And I think that was one of the really important things that Sex and the City did at the time was to, yes, Carrie Bradshaw's voice was centered as narrator, but you didn't have the sense that, Carrie's view on the world was the one right one, and actually got to see the characters negotiate many of the issues they were facing in their life through conversation with each other.
It's always good to look back to see where recognition was at the time. In 2001, Sex and the City won the Best Comedy Series Emmy, and it beat out from the big networks Everybody Loves Raymond, Frasier, Will and Grace, Friends, and from HBO, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Fox's Malcolm in the Middle. While it earned this Emmy for its third season, Sex and the City had been nominated in its first and second seasons as well, and it would go on to win a host of other awards for the work and the innovation that was put in by its cast, crew, and messaging. And these were awards across so many different categories, and it just goes to show the depth and the creativity that was involved in such an important series, one that I still just think will continue to be studied for a long time. Over at HBO, The Larry Sanders Show, which was starring Gary Shandling, was the first series from Premium TV to land Emmy nominations at all for a comedy series in the 90s. And so that preceded Sex and the City by a good 4 or 5 years. In the drama series Emmys, so in Emmy nominations for the drama series, The X-Files, wow, The X-Files was on Fox, and that began earning nominations in the mid-90s as well. And The X-Files was joined by HBO's The Sopranos in this category in 1999. So it's all sort of coming together, and HBO basically enters the Emmy nomination realm, and life has never been the same because they had the opportunity to take risks and to create content that didn't have to meet the family standards and the homogenous ratings that the networks had to pursue. Other series that came to TV from this big bang, the bang that created more pie, as it were, I'm citing in no particular order. Here we go. From the WB, here's a tremendous Hall of Fame. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Gilmore Girls, Felicity, Charmed, Reba, and One Tree Hill. From UPN, and we know now that the WB and the UPN became the CW. UPN, Buffy, again, because of the relationship there. Veronica Mars, Girlfriends, Moesha, America's Next Top Model. And from Lifetime, there was lots of reality programming, including the innovative Project Runway and its many spin-offs. And in the drama realm, they carried The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd, which is a series that really holds some very, very clever, thought-provoking value. But then they also had original programming of Army Wives, Strong Medicine, and a stunning list of shows that had been originally shown on broadcast on the big networks. Really, really great series. And this was the first chance for women to hope that some of their favorite shows from just a few years ago, they were going to get another chance to see. That was before TV series were immediately packaged and available on DVD. Now, listeners, I have to close out this episode with a plug for one of my all-time favorite series, which came to us from TV Land, Hot in Cleveland. For 6 hilarious, well-written, and impeccably performed seasons, TV Land's first original scripted series. TV Land? Yes. It starred Valerie Bertinelli from the original One Day at a Time, Jane Leeves from Frasier, Wendy Malick, who has been a tremendous cameo and supporting actress on many different series, and the incomparable, legendary Betty White. Hot in Cleveland premiered in June 2010 and was TV Land's highest-rated telecast in the cable network's 14-year history. It's important to note that it was produced by Sean Hayes of Will and Grace fame and written by Suzanne Martin, who wrote for the more noteworthy series like Ellen and Frasier. Here's a bit of audio from a Hollywood Reporter profile on the series about the time of its 2010 premiere.
Hot in Cleveland is about these three women who are on their way to Paris. Their plane crash lands in Cleveland, and instead of getting back on the plane to go to Paris, they end up in a bar where all the men think they're hot. So they decide to stick around in Cleveland even longer. And they meet this woman at a house that they decide to rent, the caretaker, and her name is Elka, and that's Betty. And then it's about these four women living their life and having fun in Cleveland.
I've worked with people I truly adore and have a great relationship, but that doesn't translate to chemistry sometimes. You can hate someone and have wonderful chemistry with them. You can love someone and not, you know. So it wasn't until we sat down and actually did the table read when our voices just all and our whatever it is, and there was chemistry, and it was just magic.
Valerie Bertinelli and Wendy Malick and Jane Leaves, they just work so beautifully together, and they genuinely love each other, and they've kind of let me into the party. Chemistry
from the Golden Girls, you know, Betty knows that, from Frasier, from Cheers. That's what makes a show. It's not the concept, it's the chemistry.
So what are you, like 100?
I don't like you. Aren't you that girl from that show?
Yes, I am. Are you a fan?
No.
I'll be honest, no series better reminds us that talent is out there. If you haven't already done so, please make Hot in Cleveland your next binge. It's hard to go wrong when Valerie Bertinelli and Jane Leaves and Wendy Malick and Betty White work from a well-written script. Buy the DVDs for the older folks in your life. It's comedy gold. We as viewers, as consumers, need to celebrate this work and the opportunities that cable and streaming have presented. So please share your thoughts, promote your latest binge, and recommend this series and all those great series that we've discussed in this season of Advanced TV Herstory. Share them with your friends. Thanks to noted television scholars and authors Amanda Lotz and Emily Newman for contributing to my understanding of this corner of the industry and for taking time out of their schedules to sit for our interviews. Find the works of and information about both of these fine women in the show notes as well as in the season description on our website, which is tvherstory.com. Do you like what you hear? Support us today on Patreon. That's right. It's an online tip jar that you can access from our podcast's homepage. So go to tvherstory.com, scroll down past the episode player where you'll see a box that reads, Become a Patron, and follow the directions. Because just like public radio, we have basic infrastructure costs here at Advanced TV Herstory. We bring you no advertising. And just like public radio, your pocket change each month can make a big difference. That difference comes in the form of the very talented Jen Eads, our audio technician, and Catherine Yang, our video and social media platform director. The three of us love to bring you this great content and hope you find it valuable and innovative and worth your time. Music found through all our episodes is called Take Me Higher. It's by Jazzer, found at Free Music Archive. And yes, indeed, we've sent him some money into his virtual tip jar. Find our Twitter and Instagram handles at our website, and there's a place at the site for you to send us a message. And of course, if your podcast app gives you the chance to write a quick review about Advanced TV Herstory, well, know that we'd be deeply humbled for a minute of your time. You listeners, bringing you the stories and understanding about how, who, and what we see on TV, that's why I podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.